In the summer of 1878, a devastating typhoid fever swept through Harper County, Kansas, claiming the lives of 47 residents. Yet 4 brothers named Blackwood exhibited an extraordinary immunity that baffled medical experts. However, their survival came at a terrifying cost that led 3 different physicians to refuse documenting their findings. The Kansas State Medical Board, in turn, quietly sealed all records related to the case. What began as a miraculous divine protection soon turned into something far more unsettling. The brothers' transformation into something otherworldly was so disturbing that the local Methodist Church went so far as to purge all references to the Blackwood family from their records. The symptoms they developed defied any known medical explanation, gradually becoming more monstrous with each passing day. By winter, it was reported that the brothers no longer cast proper shadows. Their voices took on a haunting harmonic quality that left listeners in agony, while their eyes gleamed with an eerie predator-like glow. The last known medical report, sealed for good, reportedly included the chilling phrase, "Subjects have transcended human biological classification." Nearly 150 years later, we are about to reveal why modern science has refused to acknowledge the terrifying truth behind the Blackwood brothers. But first, a question: are you brave enough to uncover the terrifying mystery that still haunts the Kansas prairie? If you're a true seeker of the unknown, hit that subscribe button and let us know where you're tuning in from. Now let's step back to 1878 and journey into a time where faith and fear intertwined. Cedar Ridge, Kansas, was a small farming community situated between wheat fields and cattle ranches in the late 1800s. With barely 300 residents scattered across the flat prairie, it was a place where everyone knew everyone's business, where a man's word was sacred, and Sunday worship at the Methodist Church served as both spiritual guidance and social gathering. Life in this harsh environment shaped its people, teaching them to view adversity as divine testing and success as a blessing. The land itself mirrored these beliefs, with miles of golden wheat stretching across the horizon, interrupted only by isolated farmhouses, windmills, or the occasional grove of cottonwood trees. The endless sky above, vast and unpredictable, dominated everything. During thunderstorms, lightning lit up the prairie, casting brief, brilliant illuminations that revealed just how isolated each homestead was. In winter, the winds howled across the flatlands with an almost human-like voice, carrying snow and cold, so brutal that a single misstep could lead to death in mere minutes. The Blackwood brothers arrived in Cedar Ridge in 1872, purchasing 640 acres of land with inheritance money from their late father's farm in Ohio. They had sold everything they owned and embarked on the long journey west in 2 covered wagons, determined to answer what they believed to be a divine calling. Ezra, the eldest, at 36, exuded the quiet authority of a natural leader. Standing at 6 feet tall with broad shoulders honed by years of farm labor, he commanded respect without seeking it. His weathered hands, scarred from years of hard work, were equally skilled at soothing a spooked horse or guiding a plow. But it was his eyes, pale blue, like winter ice, that people remembered most. Those eyes seemed to pierce through a person as though seeing their very soul. Caleb, 2 years younger, was the practical mind of the family, handling the business side of their farm. Where Ezra led with moral authority, Caleb guided with careful calculation and precision. He was known for his ability to forecast weather patterns, track grain yields, and manage finances with unmatched accuracy. His meticulous ledger books chronicled every penny, every bushel, every transaction. Josiah, 31, had the most formal education of the brothers. He studied theology, medicine, philosophy, and natural sciences at Ohio Wesleyan University before returning home after their father's death. His personal library, carefully transported to Kansas, contained over 200 volumes on subjects ranging from biblical texts to human anatomy. His farmhouse room resembled a scholar's study, more than a farmer's quarters, with books stacked everywhere and handwritten notes filling wooden boxes beneath his bed. Abel, the youngest at 25, was consumed with an intense religious fervor that sometimes alarmed even his brothers. His faith was emotional and absolute, characterized by fervent prayers, regular fasting, and claims that divine scripture alone sustained him. Though his devotion was admired, some had whispered that his passion bordered on obsession. Unlike their neighbors who attended the small Methodist church in town, the Blackwood brothers built their own chapel on a hill, overlooking their land. It took nearly a year to complete, using limestone from a nearby creek bed and oak timber from a grove on their property. The chapel stood as a testament to their austere faith, 30 feet by 20 feet, with walls of precisely fitted limestone and a roof of hand-split oak shingles. Inside they carved walnut pews, each a masterpiece of craftsmanship, and an altar inscribed with Hebrew verses from Josiah's biblical studies. Tall windows on the east and west walls bathed the space in golden sunlight during morning and evening prayers. They held their own services, following what they called primitive Methodist principles, which emphasized personal revelation, direct communion with the divine, and the priesthood of all believers. Their daily routine was a blend of hard labor and spiritual practice. Mornings began at 4 a.m. with an hour of silent prayer in the chapel, followed by a simple breakfast before working the fields. The afternoons were spent tending to animals and maintaining their equipment, while evenings were reserved for Bible study, theological discussions, and prayer, often lasting until well past midnight. By 1878, the Blackwoods had become a model of both agricultural success and spiritual devotion. Their wheat fields stretched across the prairie, their cattle grazed peacefully, and their chapel stood proudly, symbolizing their unwavering faith. Though their success was evident, the Blackwoods remained somewhat isolated from the rest of the community. They were known for their integrity and generosity, but also for their unwillingness to engage in social gatherings. The brothers seldom participated in casual conversations, preferring instead to observe with their penetrating blue eyes, which many found unsettling. They were a mysterious presence in town, arriving at the general store every 2 weeks with a carefully prepared list and leaving without any of the small talk that characterized other farmers' visits. The first case of typhoid fever struck Cedar Ridge on July 15, 1878. Mrs. Sarah Hartman, who had been in perfect health that morning, suddenly fell violently ill, and by the afternoon, her condition had rapidly deteriorated. Dr. Samuel Morrison, the county's only physician, was called to the scene. When he arrived, Sarah was delirious with fever, her skin covered in the signature rose-colored spots of typhoid. Despite his best efforts, Sarah died just after midnight, her body exhibiting unnatural rigidity and a waxy pallor. Even more disturbing, her eyes, which Dr. Morrison had closed, kept opening no matter how many times he tried to shut them. This strange occurrence marked the beginning of a mystery that would lead the Blackwood brothers down a terrifying path, one that would change the course of history and remain sealed in silence for nearly 150 years. Within 24 hours of Sarah Hartman's death, Cedar Ridge was struck by a relentless wave of illness. 4 more cases appeared, all linked by one common factor: the town's main well, which had long been the community's reliable source of fresh water. Once Dr. Morrison, the town's only physician, examined the well, he found signs of contamination with runoff seeping through the stone lining, something that should have been impossible. The second victim was Heinrich Zimmermann, a German immigrant who had farmed the same plot of land for 15 years. Like Sarah, Heinrich's health rapidly deteriorated, his fever rising unbearably within hours before he succumbed to death in the night. However, Heinrich's final moments were marked by something inexplicable. He spoke in a language no one could understand, words that seemed ancient and menacing. The third and fourth victims were the Patterson twins, Emma and Ellen, two promising 16-year-old girls. Their deaths were all the more tragic because they happened simultaneously, as if the disease had claimed them in perfect unison. James Patterson, their father, later told Dr. Morrison that in their final moments, the twins recited prayers in what sounded like Latin, but with strange and otherworldly tones that seemed impossible for human voices to produce. By August 1st, the strange typhoid strain had claimed the lives of 14 people. The victims all died within 24 hours of showing symptoms, their fevers reaching such extremes that they should have perished much sooner. And the delirium that followed seemed more like possession than a medical crisis. Fear swept through Cedar Ridge like wildfire. Families locked themselves indoors, refusing to venture out for anything other than the essentials. The once bustling general store became a place of whispered conversations and tense glances. The Methodist Church, the cornerstone of the community, was nearly empty during Sunday services, as people feared any form of gathering could lead to further infection. Dr. Morrison sealed the contaminated well and advised everyone to boil their water. But the disease persisted, spreading in a way that seemed to defy logic. It seemed to pick its victims by a strange, invisible rule. Some families lost every member, while others remained untouched. It was against this terrifying backdrop that the Blackwood brothers, who had kept to themselves throughout the early days of the epidemic, decided to intervene. The brothers had been isolated on their farm, as was their custom, avoiding unnecessary contact with the town. But on August 10th, Josiah, the third brother, told his family he had received a divine revelation. He believed the pestilence was a test not just for Cedar Ridge, but for the Blackwoods themselves. "We have been preserved for a reason," Josiah told his brothers as they gathered for their evening meal. "Our faith has kept us safe, and now we must prove ourselves worthy to serve God's will. This plague is a test of our strength and devotion." The brothers, always precise in their actions, agreed to help. On August 11th, Josiah traveled into town to offer their services to Dr. Morrison and care for the sick. But his true intent, which he kept secret from everyone but his brothers, was to deliberately expose himself to the disease and test his faith. His first stop was the home of Thomas Fletcher, the local blacksmith whose 8-year-old son Timothy had fallen gravely ill the night before. When Josiah arrived, he found the boy writhing in fever and convulsions. The family was gathered around praying for divine intervention. What happened next would be recounted in different ways by all who witnessed it. But one thing was certain: Josiah's actions were both moving and unsettling. Kneeling beside Timothy's bed, Josiah placed his hands on the child's fevered forehead. Instead of offering a conventional prayer for recovery, Josiah spoke in a powerful voice that seemed to reverberate through the room. "Lord God," he prayed, his voice unusually resonant, "if this child must suffer for reasons known only to your divine wisdom, let that suffering pass through me and my brothers. Let us bear what he cannot bear. Take this innocent life and spare it through our willing sacrifice." As Josiah spoke, something extraordinary happened. The boy's convulsions slowed and his fever began to break. For the first time in hours, Timothy opened his eyes and asked for water, complaining of hunger. To the astonishment of everyone present, the boy was recovering before their eyes. But Josiah's transformation was far more subtle, yet profoundly disturbing. As the boy's fever subsided, Josiah's skin flushed with warmth, and his pale blue eyes began to shimmer with flecks of gold like liquid metal. His movements grew stiff, as though he was struggling to control his own body. Dr. Morrison, who had been called to witness what the Fletchers were calling a miracle, was perplexed. Timothy was no longer showing signs of typhoid. But Josiah was already exhibiting symptoms that were progressing at an alarming rate. Over the next 2 days, Josiah visited every household affected by the disease, offering prayers and spiritual comfort. At each home, his actions were the same, placing his hands on the sick and praying for their suffering to be transferred to him and his brothers. The results were miraculous, but each time Josiah's condition worsened. By August 13th, when he returned to the Blackwood farm, he was burning with fever and displaying symptoms that no doctor could explain. Despite his deteriorating state, he spoke with clarity, declaring that this was no illness, but a purification process. "The Lord is burning away all that is human in me," he explained, "so that what remains will be worthy of his divine work." Soon all 4 brothers began to exhibit the same disturbing symptoms that had claimed Josiah. On August 18th, Dr. Morrison visited the Blackwood farm for what would become the most disturbing examination of his career. The summer heat was oppressive as he made his way up the dirt road. But something felt wrong as he approached the property. The Blackwood wheat fields, normally parched by the drought, stood tall and green as though untouched by the region's water shortage. The cattle appeared healthy despite the drought conditions. When he knocked on the farmhouse door, Ezra greeted him. But the eldest brother's appearance was deeply unsettling. Ezra's skin was almost translucent, revealing the network of blood vessels beneath, though the blood flowing through them was not red. It was golden, glowing faintly. Ezra spoke with an amplified voice, his words carrying an unnatural resonance. "We have been expecting you," he said. "Our transformation is almost complete and we require your witness." Inside, Dr. Morrison found all 4 brothers positioned with mathematical precision, as if carefully arranged. They were alive, their chests rising and falling with breath. But they were no longer human in any conventional sense. Ezra's body temperature was 107 degrees, yet he spoke with clarity. Caleb's pulse was barely detectable, yet he moved with the energy of a man in perfect health. Josiah's breathing had slowed to an unnatural pace, yet he showed no signs of oxygen deprivation. Abel's skin was strangely cool, despite the fever that raged within him. Caleb's transformation was marked by strange, rose-colored spots that covered his body. But they were arranged into geometric patterns, like equations written in flesh. As Morrison watched, these patterns shifted and changed as if Caleb's skin had become a living blackboard. "The calculations are becoming clear," Caleb said, his voice harmonizing perfectly with Ezra's. "The relationship between matter and spirit, between time and eternity." Josiah's body was covered with symbols that seemed to shift between ancient languages and scripts, while Abel's transformation was the most visually striking. His body emitted a soft phosphorescent glow that lit the room, and his eyes had become twin stars glowing with an unearthly light. "We no longer require food," Abel said, his voice emanating from everywhere as if coming from a great distance. Dr. Morrison stood frozen, his mind struggling to comprehend the impossible sight before him. What had happened to the Blackwood brothers was beyond medical science and understanding. It was no longer a matter of illness. It was something far more profound and far more terrifying. We draw our energy from sources that human science has yet to uncover. Ezra explained, his voice resonating with an authority that both commanded and unnerved. "We are becoming something beyond human understanding, existing between the mortal and the eternal." Dr. Morrison, ever the skeptic, was met with resistance when he tried to document his findings. The Blackwood brothers insisted that their transformation was a divine gift, an unmistakable sign that God had chosen them for a special purpose. They spoke of being refined by holy fire and becoming vessels for the Lord's work. But to Morrison's trained medical mind, their symptoms resembled no known disease. What he saw suggested either mass hysteria or something far darker. Suspicion began to grow in Morrison's mind. He theorized that the brothers might have been exposed to an unknown toxin, perhaps from the well water or contaminated grain in their silo. The townsfolk's reactions to the brothers' bizarre condition were divided, and a tense atmosphere began to settle over Cedar Ridge. Some, led by Reverend Marcus Thorne of the Methodist Church, viewed the brothers' survival as a miraculous sign of divine intervention. People began to make pilgrimages to the Blackwood farm, eager to witness the miracle firsthand. Others, particularly those who had lost loved ones to the epidemic, found the brothers' condition unnerving and unnatural. "It ain't right," grumbled Jacob Steinberg, who had lost his wife and 2 children in the span of a week. "Why should they be spared while good Christian folk die and look at them? That ain't no blessing I can see. Something's wrong with those boys. Something that makes my skin crawl just looking at them." The brothers' actions only added to the growing unease. Despite their unsettling condition, they continued working their fields with a strange coordinated precision that hinted at silent communication between them. Neighbors began reporting that they would stand motionless for hours, facing the sky, as if listening to an unseen force. Their nightly chapel services grew more disturbing. The brothers had always conducted their worship privately, but now the sound of their voices harmonizing in an otherworldly way could be heard echoing across the prairie. The harmonies were beautiful, yet deeply wrong, as if human vocal cords could not possibly produce such sounds. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, living on a neighboring farm, later recalled her visit to the chapel one evening. "I got within 50 yards of that building, and I swear on my mother's grave that I could feel something pushing me back," she said. "Not physically, but something inside my head telling me to turn around. Those boys are changed, Doctor. Changed in ways that ain't natural." As August bled into September, the typhoid epidemic began to subside. The contaminated well had been sealed, new water sources had been established, and the surviving residents slowly returned to their routines. But the Blackwood brothers only became more mysterious with each passing day. Dr. Morrison made weekly visits to their farm, ostensibly to monitor their health, but in reality to document their transformation. What he witnessed defied every principle of human biology and left him questioning his own sanity. Ezra's internal temperature stabilized at 106.7 degrees, yet he showed no signs of organ failure or brain damage. His eyes had taken on a golden hue that shifted, swirled, and gleamed like molten metal. When he spoke, his words carried an undeniable authority that made listeners feel an involuntary compulsion to agree, even when his statements defied reason. "Dr. Morrison," Ezra said during one of their sessions, his voice ringing with divine resonance, "you are trying to measure us with instruments designed for ordinary human physiology. We have transcended the limitations these tools are meant to assess. Our bodies now function according to principles that your medical science has not yet discovered." Caleb's transformation was no less profound. The rose-colored spots that had once covered his body now formed intricate patterns, resembling ancient scripts, symbols that moved, shifted, and rearranged themselves on his skin. Morrison, perplexed and troubled, sent detailed sketches of the markings to scholars, but none could decipher them. Even more unsettling was the discovery that Caleb's blood had transformed. When Morrison attempted to take a sample, the fluid that flowed from his vein was thicker than blood, golden in color, and moved as if driven by purpose, not by gravity or pressure. "Our circulation has been redesigned," Caleb explained, his expression almost amused by the doctor's bewilderment. "The fluid that sustains us now carries not only oxygen and nutrients, but also information and energy from sources beyond physical matter. Josiah's transformation was even more disconcerting. His voice, once clear and calm, had become entirely inhuman. When he spoke, the sound seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere, creating an eerie effect as if the very air around him was vibrating with his words. Dr. Morrison found it difficult to focus during their conversations, feeling dizzy and disoriented. He soon realized that Josiah's speech was affecting his brain chemistry, as if the very sound waves were altering his perception of reality. More disturbingly, the writing that covered Josiah's skin wasn't static. It was being actively written by some unseen force, the words appearing in real time, forming sentences and paragraphs that described Morrison's own thoughts, observations, and reactions with unnerving accuracy. "We are becoming books," Josiah said, his voice split into several simultaneous directions. "Living repositories of knowledge, both human learning and divine revelation. The transformation is encoding this information directly into our physical being." Abel's transformation had grown even more pronounced. His body now emitted a soft, phosphorescent glow that illuminated entire rooms. But his abilities went beyond the physical. He seemed to possess a new level of perception, one that defied all known human senses. Abel could predict the weather days in advance, locate lost objects without searching, and sense the approach of visitors long before they came into view. As Dr. Morrison observed the brothers, it became clear that they were no longer bound by the laws of nature as he understood them. They had become something else entirely. Creatures existing somewhere between the human and the divine, caught in a transformation that defied both science and faith. As the brothers continued to evolve, so too did the fear that surrounded them, leaving Morrison to question whether their powers were a gift from God or the product of something far darker. During one of Dr. Morrison's examinations, Abel revealed an unsettling ability to perceive things far beyond the scope of normal human senses. Without looking, he accurately identified the contents of Morrison's medical bag, described the condition of horses half a mile away, and seemed to be aware of conversations taking place in the distant town of Cedar Ridge, 3 miles away. Our senses have been opened to perceive realities that normal humans cannot detect. Abel explained, his golden eyes glowing with an unnatural warmth. We can see across distances that should be impossible, hear sounds on frequencies beyond normal hearing. The brothers' collective behavior had also shifted in a way that made them seem less human by the day. They moved with perfect synchronization, completing each other's sentences and responding to unspoken thoughts. Their need for food and sleep had diminished dramatically. Morrison noted that they consumed only about half the calories of normal men, and they required only 2 to 3 hours of rest each night. What disturbed him most was their repeated claim that they were receiving divine revelations. They spoke of visions, showing the future prophecies of coming disasters and instructions for preparing the town for some unnamed catastrophe. They began to write these revelations in a leather-bound journal, using a script that resembled no known language. As the brothers' condition deepened, the community's initial curiosity shifted to fear and suspicion. Parents forbade their children from playing near the Blackwood property, and adults crossed themselves when they saw the brothers in town. The Methodist Church, which had once hailed the brothers' survival as a miracle, began distancing itself from them. Reverend Marcus Thorne, who had praised the brothers' faith, now confided to Dr. Morrison, "I fear that in their zeal to serve the Lord, they may have opened themselves to influences that are not entirely heavenly. There is something in their eyes now, something that looks back at you with knowledge no mortal man should possess." By October of 1878, the situation at the Blackwood farm had become untenable. The brothers' transformation had progressed to the point where they could no longer be regarded as entirely human. Yet they remained lucid and articulate, speaking of themselves as purified vessels chosen by God to serve as intermediaries between the divine and mortal realms. Dr. Morrison's documentation of their condition had become increasingly frantic. His journal entries revealed a man struggling to reconcile his scientific understanding with the phenomena before him. He began corresponding with medical colleagues in Kansas City and Chicago, but their responses only deepened his confusion. "No physician I've consulted has ever encountered anything resembling the Blackwood brothers' condition," he wrote. "Their symptoms are physiologically impossible, yet I observe them with my own eyes. I begin to wonder if I am losing my mind or if there are aspects of human biology that our science has yet to discover." The breaking point came on October 15th, when young Sarah Preston, the daughter of a local farmer, disappeared while playing near the Blackwood property. Her parents found her 3 hours later, sitting in the brothers' chapel, her face serene. She claimed the brothers had shown her heavenly visions and shared secrets about angels. But when Dr. Morrison examined Sarah, he discovered that her temperature had risen to 103 degrees and her eyes now gleamed with the same golden hue as Ezra's. "Those men, or whatever they've become, they're spreading their curse to our children." Thomas Preston. Sarah's father pleaded with Dr. Morrison. "My little girl keeps talking about joining them in their holy work. She says they've shown her things no 7-year-old should know." Dr. Morrison's examination confirmed that Sarah's condition was unlike any illness he had encountered. Her fever was not typhoid, and her behavior had dramatically shifted. She spoke with knowledge of medical and theological concepts that a child her age could not possibly comprehend. Even more disturbing, she seemed to emit the same phosphorescent glow that Abel now displayed. Faced with the unsettling possibility that the brothers' condition was contagious, Dr. Morrison contacted the Kansas State Medical Board and the Regional Health Authority requesting immediate intervention. When officials arrived to investigate, the case was so disturbing that they chose to suppress it rather than study it. Dr. James Patterson, the state medical examiner, spent 3 days at the Blackwood farm in late October. His official report, sealed by the state board, allegedly contained observations that defied current medical understanding and posed significant public health risks. The report remains sealed to this day. However, Patterson's private letters to his wife, discovered years later, revealed the true extent of his horror. "I have seen things," he wrote, "that challenge not only our understanding of disease and human physiology, but the very nature of life itself. The Blackwood brothers are no longer entirely human, yet they are not dead. They exist in some intermediate state that our science cannot explain and dare not acknowledge." The community's unease grew as more children began disappearing from their beds at night, only to be found hours later, standing in the fields surrounding the Blackwood chapel. These children had no memory of how they had gotten there, but upon their return, they exhibited disturbing changes. They spoke with newfound wisdom, demonstrated abilities that unnerved their parents, and seemed to possess knowledge far beyond their years. Parents were terrified. The once close-knit community of Cedar Ridge was now fractured, torn between those who believed the brothers were divine instruments and those who feared they had become something far darker. As the horror in Cedar Ridge deepened, it became clear that the Blackwood brothers were no longer part of the world as anyone knew it. If you find yourself gripped by this chilling mystery, share this video with a friend who loves dark stories that leave you questioning what's real. The nightmare of the Blackwood brothers is far from over. What has happened in Cedar Ridge is just the beginning. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together What happens next? On October 25th, Mayor William Harrison convened a town meeting in Cedar Ridge to address what many residents saw as a crisis demanding immediate intervention. The meeting was packed with nearly every adult in the town, and the discussions revealed a community deeply divided. Some saw the Blackwood brothers as divine healers, while others viewed them as dangerous influences. Dr. Morrison was called upon to provide a medical assessment, but his testimony only deepened the confusion and fear that gripped the town. I have observed physiological changes in the Blackwood brothers that challenge our fundamental understanding of human biology, Morrison told the assembled crowd. Their vital signs are consistently abnormal, yet they show no signs of illness. Their capabilities exceed normal human limitations, yet they maintain lucid consciousness. I cannot classify their condition as a disease because they are not suffering. I cannot call it an improvement because it represents a fundamental alteration of human nature. The meeting concluded with a decision that would have profound consequences for the future of Cedar Ridge. A committee was formed to visit the Blackwood farm and demand that the brothers either reverse the changes they had undergone or leave the town permanently. The committee, consisting of Mayor Harrison, Reverend Thorne, Thomas Preston, and Dr. Morrison, would deliver an ultimatum that required the brothers to respond within a week. On November 1st, 1878, under a heavy gray sky that seemed to press down on the prairie, the delegation from Cedar Ridge arrived at the Blackwood farm. Dr. Morrison rode alongside Mayor Harrison, Reverend Thorne, and Thomas Preston, each man lost in his own thoughts about the confrontation that awaited them. From a distance, the farmhouse and outbuildings appeared normal. But as the group drew closer, subtle details confirmed Morrison's growing suspicion that the Blackwood property had become something beyond classification. The wheat fields, which should have been harvested weeks earlier, stood tall and golden, defying the coming winter's chill. The cattle in the pastures moved with an unnatural precision, grazing in geometric patterns that could only be seen from the road's elevation. The most unsettling sight of all, however, was the chapel perched on the hill. The limestone structure seemed to pulse with a faint luminescence visible even in the daylight, and strange voices emanated from within, voices that didn't sound like the familiar Methodist hymns, but something far more complex and otherworldly. When the delegation arrived at the farmhouse and knocked on the door, they were met by young Sarah Preston, whose presence there shocked her father into speechlessness. The girl appeared healthy and happy, but her golden eyes had grown more pronounced and her skin had taken on the same translucent quality that characterized the brothers. "Hello, Papa," Sarah said, her voice carrying the harmonic tones that had become the hallmark of the brothers' transformation. "The brothers have been expecting you. They're waiting in the chapel, and they're ready to answer all your questions." As the delegation made its way toward the chapel, they encountered phenomena that further challenged their understanding of reality. The ground beneath their feet seemed to vibrate with subtle energy, and the air shimmered with patterns of light that resembled heat waves. Yet the air felt cool to the touch. Birds flew in formations that defied their natural behavior, shifting into geometric shapes as the men walked toward the hill. Inside the chapel, the four Blackwood brothers were arranged in a perfect square around the altar, their bodies positioned with mathematical precision. Their transformation had reached a stage where their previous condition seemed almost normal in comparison. Their skin was entirely translucent, revealing internal structures that bore no resemblance to human anatomy. Their eyes had become pools of liquid gold with depths that seemed impossible. "Welcome," Ezra's voice echoed, seeming to come from all four brothers simultaneously. "We have been expecting you, and we understand the concerns that have brought you here. You fear what we have become, and you worry about the effects our transformation is having on your community. These are reasonable fears, and we do not dismiss them lightly. Mayor Harrison, as the official representative of Cedar Ridge, delivered the ultimatum. The brothers must either return to their human condition or leave the area permanently. The community could no longer tolerate the uncertainty and fear their presence had created. Mr. Mayor Caleb replied, his voice joining Ezra's in perfect harmony. "We understand your position, but we must tell you that what you ask is impossible. The transformation we have undergone cannot be reversed any more than a butterfly can return to being a caterpillar. We have moved beyond the boundaries of human existence, and there is no path backward from where we now stand." Reverend Thorne attempted to argue the spiritual implications of the brothers' transformation, quoting biblical passages about the sanctity of the human form and the dangers of seeking knowledge beyond what God had intended. But the brothers' response challenged these assumptions about divine will and human limitations. Josiah, speaking with a voice that seemed to echo from multiple dimensions at once, responded, "Reverend Thorne, you speak of God's design as if it were static and unchanging. But the scriptures themselves promise that human beings are destined for transformation and elevation. We have simply discovered the path that leads to that promised transformation." Dr. Morrison tried to address the medical aspects of the brothers' condition, arguing that their influence on other members of the community could pose a public health threat. But the brothers revealed the limitations of approaching their condition through conventional medical frameworks. "You have documented our transformation with admirable scientific precision." Abel set his luminous form, casting shifting patterns of light across the chapel walls. "But you continue to evaluate us using criteria designed for ordinary human physiology." The atmosphere in the chapel grew heavy as the brothers continued to assert that they had transcended human limitations. Their answers, calm, rational, and chilling in their certainty, deepened the unease of the delegation. The community of Cedar Ridge was at a crossroads, caught between fear of the unknown and the dawning realization that the brothers' transformation had rendered them beyond human comprehension. What would happen next? And what role would the brothers play in the fate of the town? If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. The terrifying events unfolding in Cedar Ridge are only beginning. We are no longer bound by the limitations that those criteria were created to measure. Ezra spoke softly, but his words carried a weight that seemed to ripple through the very air. The turning point in the confrontation came when Thomas Preston, desperate to save his daughter, confronted the brothers with an emotion that broke through the philosophical abstractions that had dominated the conversation. "I don't care about your theories and theology," Preston said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I care about my little girl. She was normal and happy before you got your hands on her. Now she talks like an adult, knows things no child should know, and looks at me with eyes that seem to see right through to my soul. I want my daughter back the way she was." The brothers responded with a mix of compassion and painful truth. They explained that Sarah's transformation didn't begin when she visited their chapel, but when Josiah had prayed over Timothy Fletcher months earlier. That prayer, they said, had opened a connection between them that couldn't be severed. Thomas Ezra said, his voice full of infinite gentleness, "Your daughter is not lost to you. She is becoming something that will serve purposes far greater than anything she could achieve within the limitations of ordinary human existence. The love you feel for her will continue to bind you together, even as she evolves beyond normal human classification." But it was Sarah herself who brought resolution to the situation that no adult could achieve. Stepping forward, she addressed the delegation with a clarity that seemed impossible for someone so young. "Papa Mayor Harrison, Reverend Thorne." Dr. Morrison Sarah said, her voice carrying absolute truth. "You're asking the wrong questions. You want to know if what's happening to us is good or bad, safe or dangerous, right or wrong. But those categories don't apply to what we're becoming. We're not better or worse than we were before. We're different in ways that make such comparisons meaningless. The brothers then offered to demonstrate their expanded capabilities to prove that their transformation represented expansion, not loss. Driven by his unyielding scientific curiosity despite his fear, Dr. Morrison agreed to witness the demonstration. What followed would haunt him for the rest of his life. The brothers arranged themselves around the delegation and began what they called a consciousness bridge, a process that allowed normal humans to temporarily experience the expanded awareness that had become their permanent state. For several minutes, that felt like hours. Morrison found himself living the reality of the brothers. He could perceive the thoughts and emotions of every person in Cedar Ridge witness events hundreds of miles away, and understand connections between seemingly unrelated phenomena that revealed the underlying unity of all existence. It was both exhilarating and terrifying knowledge poured into his mind. Knowledge that no human consciousness was equipped to contain. When the demonstration ended, Morrison felt changed. He had seen proof that reality was far more complex than conventional science allowed. But he had also realized that some knowledge was too vast, too expansive for ordinary human consciousness to process safely. His mind reeled with the weight of it. The other members of the delegation experienced similar effects. But while they all gained a glimpse of this new understanding, they also paid a price. Each of them experienced moments of intense disorientation, as their normal consciousness struggled to make sense of the flood of new information. Dr. Morrison's private analysis of the brothers' blood samples would reveal the full extent of their transformation. Under his microscope, instead of normal blood cells, he found strange structures that defied classification. They were larger than normal cells, possessed multiple nuclei, and moved with deliberate purpose. The blood is alive. Morrison wrote his handwriting frantic and trembling, not merely containing life, but possessing consciousness that coordinates cellular activities. It's as if their entire circulatory system has become a single thinking organism. Morrison discovered that the brothers hadn't merely survived the typhoid fever. They had been transformed by it. The disease had triggered some form of evolutionary adaptation, changing their fundamental biology. Their bodies were no longer human, existing in a state between life and death. The brothers revealed that their transformation had been intentional from the beginning. Josiah's prayer over Timothy Fletcher had been a calculated ritual based on knowledge unearthed in their theological studies. They had found references to divine communion that required a complete surrender of human flesh to achieve union with the eternal. "We are not dying," Caleb said, his voice resonating with finality. "We are becoming. This flesh is merely a cocoon, and we are emerging as something far greater." The brothers spoke of contact with others like themselves throughout history, individuals who had undergone similar transformations. They spoke of a network of purified vessels preparing humanity for a great change. Morrison realized the brothers had become something beyond human classification. They were not alive in the traditional sense, but not dead either. They existed in a state that science could not acknowledge, for it challenged fundamental assumptions about life and death. "You can join us," Abel said, his phosphorescent skin pulsing with an inviting glow. "Your scientific mind would be preserved and enhanced." But Morrison, faced with the unimaginable choice between humanity and transcendence, chose to remain human. Driven by an overwhelming terror, he fled the chapel, tearing through the darkness with the desperation of a man escaping something far beyond his comprehension. Dr. Morrison's flight from Cedar Ridge marked the beginning of the end for the Blackwood brothers' story. Unable to cope with the knowledge he had gained, Morrison destroyed all his research, burned his journals, and left Kansas forever. He settled in Oregon, practicing medicine for another 30 years, but never speaking of the Blackwood case to anyone. The brothers themselves seemed to understand that their presence had become incompatible with the human community they had once served. In the weeks following Morrison's departure, they began withdrawing from contact with their neighbors. The lights in their chapel, which had illuminated the prairie for months, went dark. The haunting harmonies of their evening prayers fell silent. On December 15, 1878, Thomas Preston found the first body. Ezra lay in the chapel, his transformed flesh already beginning to decompose in ways that no known biological process could explain. The brothers' story, once filled with promise and power, had reached its tragic conclusion. His golden eyes had turned to glass, and his skin had taken on the appearance of ancient parchment. There was no obvious cause of death. He had simply ceased to exist. The other brothers were found in the following days, each in a different location on the farm. Caleb was discovered in the wheat fields, his body surrounded by a circle of grain that had grown to impossible heights overnight. Josiah was found in the farmhouse library, seated at his desk with a pen in his hand and a blank page before him. Abel was discovered in the barn, his phosphorescent skin still faintly glowing in the darkness. The Methodist Church, eager to distance itself from the case, arranged for the brothers to be buried quickly and quietly in the chapel's small cemetery. No autopsy was performed. No official cause of death was recorded, and the graves were marked with simple stones bearing only names and dates. But the mystery of the Blackwood brothers did not end with their deaths. In the years that followed, the farm was abandoned and the chapel fell into ruin. Yet travelers passing through the area reported strange lights emanating from the hilltop and the sound of harmonious voices carrying across the prairie on still nights. The Kansas State Medical Board's sealed report on the case remains classified to this day. Dr. Patterson's recommendation that the matter be permanently suppressed in the interests of public health and scientific integrity was accepted without question. The official position is that the Blackwood brothers died of typhoid fever complications and that any reports of unusual symptoms were the result of mass hysteria brought on by the epidemic. In 1923, the abandoned Blackwood farm was purchased by a development company with plans to build a new town on the site. However, construction workers refused to work near the chapel ruins, reporting feelings of overwhelming dread and strange visions. The project was abandoned, and the land was eventually donated to the state as a wildlife preserve. The preserve remains closed to the public, officially due to environmental concerns, but local residents know the real reason. The Blackwood brothers' transformation may have ended with their deaths, but the questions they raised about the nature of human existence, the boundaries between life and death, and the possibility of transcendence through the surrender of self continue to haunt those who know the full story. Modern science still refuses to acknowledge the Blackwood case, not because the evidence is lacking, but because the implications are too disturbing to contemplate. If the brothers' transformation was real, if they truly became something beyond human classification, then our understanding of biology, consciousness, and the nature of existence itself must be fundamentally reconsidered. The truth is that some mysteries are too dangerous to solve, some knowledge too terrible to possess. The Blackwood brothers discovered a path to transcendence that required the complete surrender of their humanity. In doing so, they became something that human society could neither understand nor accept. Their story serves as a warning about the dangers of seeking knowledge that humanity is not prepared to handle. In their desire to commune directly with the divine, to bypass the limitations of human existence, they opened themselves to forces that transformed them into something neither fully alive nor completely dead. The chapel on the hilltop stands empty now, its windows dark and its doors sealed. But on certain nights, When the wind is still and the moon is dark, travelers report seeing 4 figures standing in the wheat fields, their faces turned toward the sky as if listening to some distant voice. What we do know is that the Blackwood brothers' quest for divine communion led them to a destination that science cannot map and religion cannot explain. They became living proof that there are some thresholds that once crossed cannot be uncrossed, and some transformations that are irreversible. This mystery shows us that the boundaries between life and death, between human and divine, may be far more permeable than we imagine. The Blackwood brothers found a way to transcend those boundaries. But the price they paid was their humanity itself. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed? Leave your comment below and share your theories about what really happened to the 4 brothers. If you enjoyed this tale and want more horror stories like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries. The truth is out there waiting for those brave enough to seek it. See you in the next video. Thank you all very much for watching my video until the end. I sincerely appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.